everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. Today's episode is going to be another interview, and I decided to sit and talk with someone whose work I deeply appreciate and whose presence I find invaluable. Her name is Sara Al-Hassan. She's a Sudanese American commentator living in the US, and her page Be Us on Blast on Twitter and Instagram, and apparently now on TikTok, has been the most important source for me to learn and to understand about the situation in Sudan currently, but also over the last 5 years. I highly recommend checking out her page if you want to learn more and get a better understanding of what's happening in Sudan currently, but also it's a great resource for going back and seeing what people were talking about in 2019 during the revolution, or in 2021 during the coup. Sudan has a very long and tumultuous history, to put it lightly, and we touch on a lot of subjects that are related to things I talk about on this podcast, especially as it relates to Sara as a person, who is not only covering and doing what she can to try to affect change where she's at and online, but is also struggling against despair, like a lot of us. And so I wanted to sit and talk with her about these things, those feelings, what she's doing, but also to move a bit of focus of this podcast to branch out. As I've said in other episodes, I myself have been so heartbroken and so focused on Gaza that I can't really think about other things, but I obviously think that it's really important to be mindful and aware of the other war situations, tragedies, political developments across the region and indeed across the global south, especially because so many of these conflicts and struggles are interconnected. And so if we want to be able to act impactfully for one situation, we do have to understand the bigger implications and connections. And so in the case of Sudan, it is very interconnected with Palestine, with Egypt, with the EU, and generally with colonization as a whole. One note, this episode is not going to be an overview of Sudan. If you are interested in that before listening to this interview, I will provide good articles and actually a comic that I created about Sudan, me and Hisham, a few years ago already, for whom I interviewed Sara for. And that might give you a bit of frame of reference if indeed you don't know much about Sudan. We jump right into it in this conversation. And one more thing before I start that interview. If you want to support this podcast, I've opened up a tip jar. I'll also provide the link in the show notes, and it's just a very simple and easy way for you to support this podcast financially, help it sustain itself, and hopefully help it grow. And so, yeah, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Sara. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Sara Al-Hassan. I am a Sudanese American writer and editor. I'm, I guess, most known for my coverage of the war in Sudan online, all across social media, Twitter, Instagram, and most recently, TikTok.
No, I remember, you've been commenting and writing about Sudan for a very long time.
Yeah.
And with the current war, you do these daily updates, which is a lot of work, and I think I'm very grateful for it. But you were doing it as well, even for the coup. What is it now? 3 years ago? 2 years ago?
Yeah, in 2021. Yeah, 3 years ago. And the revolution before that.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's been a lot. Sudan has been going through it for quite some time, and arguably since independence. Has been
Yeah.
going through it since independence. But definitely in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been very active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a thing that's driven me, that pulls me towards Sudan a lot is that there's just the timing of it all feels very parallel with Lebanon. The last 5 years for Lebanon also had this revolutionary highs and then this dip and then these constant dips. And it's definitely not comparable at the moment, but now there is a war situation in Lebanon and definitely in the
Right.
south. So it's been a really difficult 5 years.
Yeah. Very emotionally taxing.
Very emotionally taxing indeed. And in some ways, it does feel like we've hit a nadir.
Hmm.
But so in this moment, I'll ask you the difficult question that I alluded to before, which is, yeah, how are you doing?
Um, that is a very difficult. To be honest, I don't know. I think that's the answer I've been giving to avoid sort of facing the actual feelings, what I'm actually going through. But I think if I were to dig a little deeper, turmoil would be the word I would use. I think a lot of emotional and intellectual turmoil, sort of trying to come to grips with the reality that not only that there's a war going on, but that it's almost been a year since the war has started. And that's kind of like a concept that my brain cannot comprehend, not accept, but actually comprehend. And also, the intellectual turmoil of we saw this happening, right? We saw ourselves reaching this moment. And there have been so many people, so many voices over the years, particularly, I mean, even before the revolution, but particularly since the revolution, that have been warning about this moment. And there's a certain petrification. I think we were all just sort of put on freeze, where you see something approaching and there's nothing you can do about it. And that also applies in the personal too, of like, this is happening and there's nothing I can do about it. And I'm kind of just frozen in time, watching it happen, unable to look away, and at the same time, unable to make any sort of change in the reality. That is a lot to contend with. It ends up manifesting in very sort of like extreme ways. On the one hand, there's the extreme numbness of like, okay, well, I can't believe this is happening and this is happening. There's nothing I can do about it. And I'm unable to feel because of the sheer amount of tragedy that I'm experiencing and also absorbing through the news. And then on the other hand, extreme rage, extreme disappointment, extreme just like panic at the need to do something, the need to change this, the need for this to stop. So turmoil. Turmoil is the word, sort of just a very erratic, violently swinging pendulum of emotions right now.
Yeah, I think I can relate quite a bit. But there's one thing you actually hit on something that's brilliantly worded. I mean, frozen in time, but also it just reminds me of what Lina Monzer said in the interview that I did with her a few weeks ago. She's in Beirut, and she describes her current situation as being like kind of like a Clockwork Orange, like sitting there with her
Mm,
eyes kind of forced open and
yeah,
seeing I mean, there is war in Lebanon, but also, I mean, we're right next to Palestine. And so it's like we are forced to see this thing and constantly afraid, is this going to happen to us? It's terrifying,
yeah.
but there is that sort of, yeah, numbness is a word. For me, I also want to, because I remember, I think a couple of years ago already, I saw a story of yours on Instagram about going to the supermarket in where you live in sort of the West Coast in the US, where things are
Hmm.
kind of fine, and the alienation of that, wherein you know what's going on back home, you know what's going on with your people, and then you go out and people are like complaining that there are no kumquats in the
Right,
fruit
right,
aisle, and it
right.
just shifts, and I wonder how you're doing.
The dissonance is real. Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, again, like there's always two levels to everything that we're experiencing. There's the personal, and then there's the sort of like the global, right? On the personal level, I am in the back of my mind, I am constantly thinking about the fact that our next door neighbors have no idea what's happening to us, right? These are people that we see in the street when we pull out to go to the supermarket or on errands or whatever. They are people who occasionally even engage with us. They come around and they have no clue the the complete destruction of our world, right? That's actively ongoing. And in a global sense, it's also the dissonance of like I'm in a place where I can't say that the majority is liberal in any way. I live in a fairly conservative area of the United States, and particularly in the city where I live, in the neighborhood, I'll say the neighborhood, or the smaller city where I live, there isn't a lot of activity in like political activity, I would say, especially not in the global sense. So there's also the dissonance of like, not only is this happening in Sudan, but it's also happening in Palestine, and the historical deep connection between Sudan and Palestine and Sudanese people and Palestinians is, we grew up knowing the Palestinian cause. We were taught in school, at home. This is something that is deeply ingrained in our culture as Sudanese people. Even now, you'll see videos of displaced people in Sudan praying for Gaza, right? I mean, that's how deeply embedded in us it is. And so to see the absolute insanity that is taking place right now, and the I mean, there's no word to describe what's happening to Palestinians, right? There's no word to accurately describe that terror, that destruction, that zulum, right? I can't even say the word in English, right? That deep injustice. And then you go out in the street and nothing, right? There's not even a sense of like anything is different. Nothing in the air is compatible with how you feel on the inside.
Yeah.
And that's maddening. It's maddening to have to live in two separate realities. I mean, I've reached a point where I can no longer pretend. I'm not even engaging with the outside world because I can't. I feel like I literally can't. I cannot
Yeah.
dissociate in that way.
I don't leave the house much these days.
Yeah, yeah,
And
the same.
I mean, I live in Vienna and it's quite a metropolitan, like a cosmopolitan, whatever city. There's a lot of types of people. And it is just difficult seeing people and seeing people go about their day. But also, and this I find an interesting kind of comparison. I am, I mean, preaching to the choir here, frustrated by the fact that there just is not much knowledge or discussions about Sudan outside of Sudanese
Hmm.
circles. And that's something that I've tried to do a bit more in my work in terms of like I interviewed you a couple of years ago for a comic I had done, and it just it is very peripheralized in the Arab world, you know? I don't know, but one thing that I find different and has this, it could be a double-edged sword because it's like over here everybody has an opinion about Palestine. Everyone has an opinion about
Hmm.
Israel. So my neighbor, I have two old lady neighbors. One is racist. She's incredibly shitty and horrible and Austrian. And the other one is a sweet old lady who's a Zionist. You know what I mean? And so it's like there was a kind of betrayal at that point when because she'd asked me how I'm doing, and I'm like, not good because there's war in my country. And she goes, oh yeah, but
Right.
Hezbollah and whatever. I'm like,
No, man.
but I can't even so this is the difference where it's like it's nice that more people know, but at the same time then I have to deal with all these assholes, and especially here in Austria who has a very specific relationship with Jewish people, with the state of Israel, and then the whole guilt complex,
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
It's almost like I wish they didn't know, so I didn't have to deal with their ignorance that's like incredibly violent.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in general in discourse online with Sudan, that you don't have as many like people, figures that talk about Sudan in the West, leftists, whatever, that then you have to deal with their bullshit and their misreadings, you know?
Right. It's really interesting that you bring up this point because yesterday I was having a discussion with someone about my frustrations around people not genuinely engaging with what's happening in Sudan, right? Like I said, I've been covering the war since the very beginning. In the beginning, I was just doing the news, right? Just sort of like a recap of major headlines of the day. And then I started doing sort of short videos explaining what's happening. That actually happened after, I want to say, time is a social construct, but I want to say sometime after October 7th. I want to say sometime in October. I started making videos on a regular basis explaining different aspects of the war, but also sort of giving some context about Sudan. And I think for us, the situation is different because one, most people, not to say that people have deep accurate knowledge about the Palestinian cause. But I think when it comes to Sudan, people have no context whatsoever about the country. They have no idea. I mean, most people can't point to it on a map. So the struggle became, how do you simplify what's happening enough for people to comprehend, and at the same time reflect the complexities of the situation. And it became very difficult with each video. It became more apparent that what I'm saying is above the minimum level of understanding, right? I would have to keep dumbing things down in order for people to understand what I'm talking about a specific point, right? I would have to keep going back to more like basic points. And so there's an organization, two organizations, NASA Sudan and SDN, the Sudan Diaspora Network, who have created this sort of like week-long program starting, I think, March 30th, basically sort of getting people engaged in what's happening. There's every day is a different event. There's sort of like a book club. There's a this, there's a that, whatever. There's a collection of activities for people who want to understand more about Sudan and engage. And I was talking about how in the beginning of making these videos, myself and other people were having people who were surprised, right? I can't believe this is happening. We haven't heard about it. It's been since April. That's crazy, which was fine. And then, with each new video, people were gaining sort of a better understanding. I don't know how better it is, but whatever, a better understanding of Sudan and what's happening in Sudan. And then after a certain point, it became sort of exactly what we're seeing on social media with what's happening in Palestine. Let's boost this information. Let's get the word out there. Let's raise the awareness, which, yes, of course, totally agree. This is why we're doing this. But the comments turned from people who seem to be genuinely absorbing the information to generic little sound bites, right? Little text bites that people would just drop in there to, I know, push the algorithm, right? The more comments you get, the more your video goes around. But it just, I reached a point where I was like, are people actually listening to what's being said in the video, or are they just writing something so that they could fill the daily quota of, I did something. And I don't I don't want to say it like that because it sounds like I'm ungrateful. I'm not ungrateful. I understand that this is the dystopian way that things operate now, right? But I can't help but have that thought in the back of my mind of, how much did you retain from what I just said? Did it really resonate with you? Did you really understand, empathize, or sympathize with what I said? Or are you just doing what you feel needs to be done, regardless of whether you understood or not?
Yeah.
And yeah, the more time passes, it just becomes worse and worse. And so I sort of said that on Twitter. I was like, I get why you're doing it, but please at least comment on something that I said, right? Oh, I didn't realize that, blah, 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 or whatever. Instead of, the comment chain of what's your favorite color, or come on, let's boost her. Keep eyes on Sudan. Like, yes, but also let's also genuinely engage with the material. And a person that I deeply, deeply respect, an activist that I deeply respect, Muzin Anil. I think you might know her or come across her work. Muzin is a brilliant mind, and her response to that was, I couldn't refute it. She was saying people cannot engage with what they don't understand, and we are not doing a good job of presenting the issue as it is, rather trying to, because we're avoiding the truth. We're avoiding the truth of how, she didn't say this, but she said we're avoiding the truth of how complex the situation is, but also the reasons behind it. And avoiding that truth, we are not presenting information that people can absorb. And I agree, but I also think it's hard. It's hard to get people's attention. It's hard to keep people's attention.
Yeah.
Not it's hard to get people's attention, but it's hard to keep it. And that has been a struggle, and people feel split between giving attention to Palestine and giving attention to Sudan and any other conflict that is around the world. But to answer your question, I know that was a very long-winded, roundabout answer, but to answer your question, I often think, is it better when I see the hashtag discourse online about Palestine and the people who are, you know, at the very least, or, if we want to be generous, we can say well-intentioned people who are passionate about what they're seeing and want to engage, but are sort of off base at times. I wonder, is it better that nobody knows about Sudan and understands it? That way we don't have to deal with these takes? Or is it better that people, even in their misguidedness, are engaging and passionate and willing to do something? I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know which is worse or better.
No, yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting a clear-cut answer because it's God knows. I mean, yeah, he said a lot of things there actually that are really interesting. And God, which one to start with? I do hate the hashtag
I'm sorry, I
discourse.
said a lot.
No, I
Yeah,
love
the
it
hashtag
because
discourse is around.
yeah, because it's also this thing of like, okay, so what if everyone knows? What are they going to do about it? What's the action? And I think the one thing that still hasn't shifted, and I don't know how it's going to shift or how I think it needs to shift, is that when people learn about, Sudan, when they learn about Palestine, when they learn about God, when they learn about the Congo, it's that they don't
Mm,
think of like, oh, it's over there. And it's like, oh, that's sad for
yeah,
them, those poor Africans. It's like, no, this is
right.
your governments, your states, the companies that are registered there, you know, that it's your I'm in a signal group for queer activists for Palestine here in Vienna, and there was like a big rough today that essentially revolved around the concept of allyship.
Hmm.
And someone was presenting as an ally, but she was really just reproducing a lot of Orientalist white bullshit.
Mm,
And a lot of people took offense to that. And people were like, no, what does this just have a conversation here? And I was like, no. And so it is complex. It is very
yeah.
complex. And definitely with Palestine, there's so much of the communications format that's like, people openly say this is not a complex issue. It is simple. There's an occupier and an occupied. And it's like, I definitely get that from a communication perspective. I definitely get that from a kind of
Hmm.
like basic overview. And I definitely get that as like a counter hegemonic narrative because there is so
Right.
much more of a hegemonic, yeah. But it's really complex. It is really complex because again, when you think about what should we do, and especially when we start understanding that these things are so heavily tied with Western imperialism, with capitalism, with all these other structures, it's not as simple of just.
Right.
And so the struggle for Palestinian liberation, the struggle for decolonization is never going to fit in a single hashtag. And so and I long for those conversations and those discussions that actually push to a certain thing and those actions. For me personally, I am just so fucking burnt out. I have
Yeah.
no, I didn't respond in the group. I said one thing and I wanted to then write, there was like an old, like my 2019 brain, kind of that one brain cell was just like, maybe write a post about allyship and bell hooks about camaraderie. And I was like, no, I don't want to do this because
Yeah. I feel you on that. To, it's very hard to keep rehashing the same points. I think for people, that's the one thing I'm noticing now. Especially, I mean, even within the Sudanese context, you know, younger Sudanese people have so much passion and energy, and I love that for them. And so they engage. I'm sorry, that came out very condescending. That's
no.
not what I meant. I genuinely love that for them. But they have the energy to discuss issues or aspects of the Sudanese struggle that we have been talking about for years. It's new to them, just like the Palestinian issue is new to all of these young people across the globe who are just learning or just comprehending what's happening. And so they are able to engage in these discussions in a way that older people or people who have been a part of these movements or have been aware of these issues for much longer are burnt out about. I can't talk anymore about the Sudanese phenotype. This is a discussion that's been happening on Twitter. Sudanese people are all light skinned, or Sudanese people are all dark skinned, or the light skins are colonizers, they're settlers, they're not indigenous to the land. I can no longer have those conversations. Again, I think what ends up happening earlier in this conversation, we talked about the complexity. There's no space for complexity. But also, much earlier in the conversation, we talked about the fact that there are more powers at play than just in the Palestinian case. It's more than just Israel and Palestine, right? There are other factors at play. There are other powers that feed into this. In the same way, people, I think, fall victim, or people who are just getting into this fall victim to the trap of let's make it about each other as opposed to the politics. I think the saddest part, the most frustrating part about what's happening right now is that the world has become more cognizant, more aware, more outraged about what's happening to Palestinians for the first time ever, right? The fact that people in videos are saying Palestine instead of Palestine to me is mind blowing. And that's sort of the like it's what I use to make myself feel better is that who would have thought who would have thought that anybody in America, right, any like little white kids in America would be talking about Palestine, saying Palestine, talk about Palestine, period, but also referring to it as Palestine. That's crazy to me. I didn't think it was going to happen in my lifetime, to be honest with you. But the frustrating realization for a lot of these people is that with all of this global attention, with all of this mobilization on the political front, there is nothing happening, right?
Yeah.
People realize now that their voices don't mean as much as they thought they did,
Yeah.
right? Especially people in places like where I live, like in America, where land of the free, home of the brave, we vote, we have all of our rights, we are freedom of speech, all of the things that we, use to justify our superiority in the world don't mean jack because we've been screaming at the top of our lungs and they've literally looked in our faces and told us you don't matter, right? That's something that for those of us who also have roots in other parts of the world, it's not new, and we knew that, right? We knew, but I just think in terms of the burnout, none of these issues are new. None
Yeah.
of these issues are new. None of these conversations are new. None of the hashtag discourse is new. And without making room for complexity, making room for understanding, making room for learning, we're not going to reach the goals we aim to reach. Our movement, whichever movement it may be, will not be as effective as we want it to be. I really, I really struggle with the idea that we can present, for example, what's happening in Sudan in a palatable, easily digestible way. If people are not willing to make the effort, it's never going to happen. No matter how many videos you make, no matter how engaging, how exciting, how whatever you make it, it's not going to work. At some point, people have to sit down and do the work. And right now, because we don't have any political power, in my opinion, wherever we don't really have much political power. We are relying on these other methods like social media. And it doesn't work like that. At some point, there has to be a shift, and that shift isn't going to happen because our attention spans have been destroyed. And we expect things to be simple. And like you said, I understand presenting issues as this is simple as in the simple difference between right and wrong. In that sense, yes, but in every other sense, absolutely not.
Yeah. No, and like sticking with Palestine, because for me, what I think a lot about is the Jordanian monarchy, that like has collaborated with the Zionists since the 30s, since the 40s,
Right.
that the siege on Gaza is partly enforced by the Egyptians, by Sisi, who just got billions of dollars, billions of euros from the European Union. And so I think the desire to frame things simply is to be able to sort of project and sort of have slogans and also give a sense of a kind of empowerment of like, we just have to say free Palestine loud enough. But it betrays, it reveals that, like you said, the lack of political power. And I think the last 10 years have really taught us so much as Arabs, as people from the global South, that I think people in the West just don't think is relevant to them. But it all happened to
Yeah.
them because we protested. We protested hard. And again, it is that simple idea. Like I remember in 2019 having a lot of like being in a lot of political discussions before the uprising, before the revolution. And what you hear oftentimes, people say, we'll do this, and then we're gonna raise a like go to Dar al-Fatwa, we're gonna do this, we're gonna submit whatever. And then the person they're talking to is like, okay, to what if they reject your offer? And they say, okay, بننزل على الشارع. We'll go down to the streets, ونولع الدنيا, and we'll like set things on
Right.
fire. And it's like we did that,
Hmm.
and we did that for like months, and nothing changed. Sudan, it's a very different example because I think, honestly, one thing that I found so powerful and impactful that breaks my heart that like that experiment has so been like destroyed in so many ways is the resistance committees, is the mutual aid, is those forms of actually bringing the revolution to the everyday. That I can't say wasn't impactful. We didn't have anything like that. But so it really pushed the limit of our understanding of what does a revolution even mean. And so much of the aesthetics, which is very simple, of we'll go down, we'll protest, they'll get scared. It's like we go to the king's castle with the pitchforks, and the king goes, oh, no, no,
Hmm.
he's got riot police. They
Right.
shoot at us, we flee back and forth. So then actually imagining to how do we seize political power? How do we, and again, there are
Hmm.
slogans, organize. What do you mean? What does that
What does
mean?
that mean?
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about this because even here, I mean, especially here, I love that you use the word the quota because that's what I've been thinking a lot with protests when I go out and protest in solidarity with Palestine, where it's like it's better than doing nothing, but also I'm
Hmm.
a bit worried that it's filling in this feeling of a quota that I've done my part when I could be doing something else, but I don't even know what that something else is because A, all the other options are a little bit more risky. I'm also an immigrant in this country, so I'm not going to take that much risk.
Right.
But then what am I asking from other people? What am I asking from white people and cis people and whatever? We don't even have that imaginary. And that's where I think learning is really important. Learning from the past, learning from other struggles. And so, yeah, I mean, for instance, I did learn a lot from Sudan. I've learned a lot of feminism from Sudan. Like, there are these Twitter spaces, which I don't go into because I feel like I shouldn't, but just the titles of them, these like Big Sister.
Hmm.
But then also, I think we spoke about this when I interviewed you years ago, was that like compared to other places and other contexts, whenever I see like a podcast or an interview or a panel about Sudan, it's mostly women. And I love that.
Yeah.
But also like learn community and this ideas of like transforming and bringing revolutions home. I think that's a huge thing. It's not just learning the configuration. This is why I hate
Hmm.
geopolitics. Okay, there's Hemeti, there's Burhan, there's this in the
Right.
south, there's whatever. But like actually learning from other communities, considering them equal and being like, to how did they do it? And it's not like, oh, well, they did it because they're different or something, and they're more likely to do it because whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think in many ways that's why I said earlier that people in the West are just realizing how little their voice means to their political leadership, which is something that we are unfortunately very intimately familiar with. And in that sense, they could really benefit from learning from our experiences in the global South and in the places that they think they're better than, right? All of these places that they lend their solidarity to out of pity or out of their sense of righteousness, whichever one it may be, are not that different from where they live. But, you know, just in terms of the aesthetics of what kind of life you feel you're living versus the life you're actually living. And so from what I've been reading and watching online as people gain more awareness about how their countries are complicit in other struggles or how things are connected, I think there's still an inability to disconnect from, and it's hard, but there's still an inability to disconnect from your mode of thinking and living and the like the structure that you have for how things should go, whether it be in terms of how to affect change or resistance or whatever it is, and trying to see what other people are doing, what other modes exist, and connecting between those, right? You can't provide, in my opinion, you cannot provide true solidarity, or you cannot effectively help a struggle in a different place without understanding where that struggle comes from, how the resistance in those places takes place. If you're still looking at it from your perspective, as I'll say, if I look at it from my perspective as an American, it will make no sense to me. The resistance committees would make no sense to me. I mean, one of the struggles I've been facing is trying to get people to understand what emergency response rooms are and how they work. When I say volunteer organization, I don't think people truly comprehend what I mean, right? When I think about it with my American brain, I think, oh, people are coming in from abroad and volunteering to help the people who are affected by the war, versus it being, no, the victims themselves are the ones who are doing the volunteering and helping themselves. And it's proven by the comments as well, where people are like, oh, so is there a way for us to go? Is there a way for people to go and volunteer? And it's like, no, girl, it's a war. Like, you can't go. What are you talking about? So, but then I realized that, oh, I got to switch to my American brain so I can understand why people are not comprehending what I'm saying. And it's very difficult. You have to suspend so much about yourself in order to understand where somebody else is coming from. And again, not to be, I mean, the podcast is called Politically Depressed. We're not there yet. A lot of us are not there yet. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of mental willpower to suspend your way of thinking and everything that you know in order to absorb something else. But once we are able to do that, I believe we could really affect change, because we do have a lot to learn from other struggles. We do have a lot to learn from other modes and methods of resistance.
Yeah. You hit on something really big there. So one thing I talk about a bit in my podcast is I'm married to a white person. I love them with all my heart, but they are very much so within some of these ideologies, and they're raised with it, their whole family. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it is so much of whatever. And so then sometimes explaining some things, it is just emotionally difficult to separate, to be like, okay, I'm gonna just put this aside now. And they're sweet, they're loving, they're fine. They're not like
Right.
aggressive in any way or whatever, but it is still difficult where it's like, I'm going to try to transport my mind, but also difficult because I want to, at the basis, reject its hegemony, which is, the hegemony of white supremacy. So it's like, I'm going to talk in your language, but I'm also going to shit on the language as I'm using it. It's bizarre
Right.
because, and I do think a lot about bell hooks, and Allah
Mm-hmm.
yarhamah. God, actually, I'm still not over her passing. But she used to say a lot, you've got to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And it's like a harsh reality where it's like, do I want to just yell at them? Do I want to just feel better about myself? Or, you know what I mean? Fish khillet. Or do I want to try to actually build some actual bonds of solidarity or understanding or whatever? And honestly, I actually was supposed to live in the United States for university. What is it, 11 years ago now? I
Mm-hmm.
went to an international school in Beirut, an American school, and there's like a kind of pipeline between the American school and the American university in Beirut, and then to go to the US. And I actually couldn't. As, you can hear with my English, I have a lot of mannerisms that are very American. I watched a lot of TV, so I know all the references and it just feels second nature. Sometimes it's creepy. But then when I got there, you said a term, I felt like I had to suspend myself. I almost felt like any sense of identity I'd had to dissolve. And I'd have to there was no space because it was also like upstate New York.
Oh
So,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So, but then all these white people, all these like, there's like 5,000 kids in the school. And so I would have to not be Lebanese, you know what I mean? Or if I was
Hmm.
Lebanese, it would just be that like one quirk, like in a sitcom, like that
Right.
one quirk of the
Right.
character, like this one's shy, this one's Lebanese, this one is, like, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's still very much a sense of assimilation that needs to take place. And I don't think people realize, I mean, now it's different a little bit, right? Things are different now. I think this new generation is lucky in that there are, I mean, maybe it's also surface level, but it's a move in the right direction. There has been a noticeable change, I mean, depending on where you are in the new generation of like being more accepting and allowing for not just the difference, but allowing for understanding and acceptance of that difference, right? It's no longer just a quirk, it's like a legitimate part of you that people understand. Again, very dependent on where you are in America, where you grow up or where you live. But my experience, although a little bit different from yours, but still very similar, in that I grew up partially here, partially in Sudan, partially in France. And so I had all of these elements of different cultures. But once I moved back to America, I realized that none of those things, none of those other elements were acceptable. The only acceptable route was to be American and then to prove how American you are. So, I mean, I get it in that sense. I get what you're saying of like having to suspend yourself is tough. And in the other direction is even tougher. I would agree. I mean, I would argue. I would argue that for them to suspend themselves in order to understand other cultures is infinitely more difficult because especially if you don't have, I mean, for like third culture kids or kids who grew up with other influences, it's a little easier to be flexible. But if one perspective is all you know, then it takes a lot of willpower again. It takes a lot of willpower to want to to gain that flexibility. And then it takes a lot of effort, takes even more effort to actually get to that place where you are flexible and you do understand. It's tough. It's tough. And so when you engage in discussions with people who are well intentioned and well meaning and want to understand but can't suspend themselves long enough to understand, it becomes a little frustrating. Not that I'm saying that that's the situation with your partner, but but just like in general, there are a lot of people who truly want to understand, genuinely want to understand, but just cannot suspend themselves long enough to.
So, yeah, it is difficult. And I do try to hold space for that difficultness. But again, the problem is that they're still having the day in the sun, like they are still the, there's the
Yeah, yeah.
Americanism. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, I've always grown up with a split sense of self. Growing up, first I was raised in Saudi and then in Lebanon, and like all the TV, all the shows, all the games, all the whatever assumes a white audience, assumes a whatever.
Yeah.
And so, I was raised with English more than Arabic, partly again because my parents knew that like we'd prefer him to know English so that if once he graduates, he can go out of this
Hmm.
shithole,
You
you know
wouldn't
what I mean?
struggle. Right, right.
Yeah, but then I left and I was like, oh, I can't stand it out here. But anyway, so it's hard to hold space for it when it's like it's a privilege to have that uniform, to not, because that's a process of colonization as well, right? like this English, or then in Lebanon also
Hmm.
French, and also of like what I've been describing sometimes as like soft imperialism, right? Cultural imperialism, as they say sometimes,
Hmm.
that my partner, born and raised here in Austria, I often come up, I tell them like some reference from a show that I grown up watching, Dexter's Lab or Boys Next, or like
Mm,
you know what I mean, Ed and Eddie. And they'd be
right.
like, "Oh, well, you
What?
know, I never watched those things. You know, we had our
Right.
own TV." And it's like, precisely because you were protected. And that's a privilege to be protected from American mass media.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
So, one thing that really upsets me these days is like, I would love to sit and talk with you about, I don't know, TV or about any of your other interests. One thing
Hmm.
that really upsets me is that, like, we're automatically suspended because I am just an Arab. You know, when people meet me here, I don't look Arab, but like, as then how I'm engaging with them and how I understand them. And then
Right.
I come from Lebanon, and then there's like a back and forth sometimes. They assume because I look kind of whiter that, like, oh, I must be one of the good ones. Um, that's a different complex. Yeah, they assume my whiteness and then they feel safe around me and then they say some shit and then it's like, whoa, fuck off.
That's so interesting.
But so there already is a suspension because then I can't just be someone who loves this type of music or a person who's funny because partly because of how I'm seen, but also the urgency of the fucking situation. For me, it's Lebanon and Palestine, and for you, it's much more Sudan. But obviously, I know that your heart is breaking because of Gaza as well. But so it really breaks my heart and how much sometimes just like Arab brilliance, Sudanese brilliance is just like literally killed. But then also for those who are alive, like sort of spending all their time just becoming de facto activists.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend. I have a friend who, during the revolution, was also really active online, sort of sharing news and, writing posts and whatever, doing the online activism. And she would, at some point, she just sort of exploded and was like, I'm not an activist. I'm just a person, right? I'm just a Sudanese person who is experiencing this and feels the obligation to relay this information to you because the organizations or the people who should be doing it, whose job it is to do this, are not, right? And it is that like dwindling down of your personality. You just become one dimensional. Just hello, I am. This is all I am, right? I mean, for so many people, I'm just that girl who talks about Sudan. Even Sudanese people, I'm just that girl who talks about Sudanese politics and issues of turmoil. I can't be funny. I can have a different personality trait. I can have different interests because then you're moving outside of the box I put you in, and I don't understand you anymore. What do you mean you are a full person with a life outside of what the 3 minutes I see every day? It's very very difficult, and it's easy to point the finger at at white people and say that you only look at us through the lens of our race or our ethnicity or the countries that we come from, whatever little you know about them. But our people are also guilty of that. Sudanese people after the revolution, when I was finally like, hey guys, I can no longer I don't after the signing of the agreement between the military and the FFC, and things were moving along, and I could no longer make sense of what was happening. Right? They signed this agreement. I couldn't really understand what was going on. I'm not in Sudan. It was very difficult to keep track. So I respectfully bowed out. I said, hey guys, I really don't understand what's happening anymore. And I'm finding it very difficult to follow along. And if I don't understand it, there's no way I can explain it to you. So I'm going to stop here. And, good luck to everybody involved or whatever. And people were very angry. Remember that my account is a personal account. I don't have an activist account. I don't have an organization. I am not part of any group. My account what I talk about is part of my personal account. And so when I started talking about silly, frivolous things in my life or the shows I was watching or whatever, people became irate. How dare you? How dare you no longer talk about Sudan? Oh, it's not, you abandoned your country, you abandoned your people. I can't believe you're this shallow. I can't believe yeah, it was wild because I'm sure those people are also watching
Yeah.
shows and living their lives and going out and whatever. And so it was funny to me. I wasn't angry or sad. I was amused because you can quickly fall down that rabbit hole of being just a mouthpiece.
Mm.
And unfortunately, now I'm in the same position on an even larger scale because people just look to me for Sudan news, Sudan related English explanations. If I make a video in Arabic, the comments are, "Can you translate? What is this about?" Well, it's not for you.
Yeah.
It's not for you, clearly. So yeah, it's unfortunately the plight of the global South. I think that's our shared experience across the global South.
Yeah.
Of you have to be somebody who understands everything about the complexities of your country, your history, your people, no matter how diverse they are. You have to be able to tell me at the drop of a hat everything about anything I ask you about your country or your people, as opposed to the West where individuality is allowed, right? Individual thought, individual perspective, ignorance is allowed, or specialized, non-specialized knowledge is allowed.
Mediocrity.
You can just know about things. I was trying to be nice, but yeah, mediocrity is allowed. Mediocrity is very much allowed, and that's something that, as a Black person, as I hate these like buzzwords, but they apply. Child of immigrants, as a whatever, like that was never an option.
Mm.
That's never an option. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating, and how you describe it reminds me of like some other situations I've been seeing, and it's been making me think a lot about the word disposability, how
Mm,
disposable you become if you don't say the right thing or if you've said one thing. And so it's been a few weeks now. There's been a lot of criticism of Mu'taz, this journalist from Gaza who
mm-hmm.
was evacuated in that and is now going around and meeting problematic people because his main thing is like, I need to stop this genocide that's still happening that I just survived. But I think there's so much of Twitter and social media that, and this isn't, I've gotten into this. I wrote a tweet and then I got like kind of jumped on and so I deleted it because I'm like, I don't have energy for this.
Right.
But
I don't
so
want to
I
deal
will
with it.
just say I'm separating actual Palestinians being like Mu'taz, you shouldn't be doing this. Don't go to Mahmoud Abbas, don't go to Joe Biden. And the tens of thousands on Twitter who are like upping this. And it's like, yeah, this person isn't radical enough. This person doesn't have the perfect politics. And it's like, he's 24. He's a journalist. He's not a journalist. Sorry, he's a photographer. Again, this breaks my
Right.
heart that if you go back to his Instagram before the war, before the genocide, he was just taking photos of sunsets. He was just taking photos of the birds.
Right.
Same with Bisan. Bisan is a storyteller. And you look
Yeah.
at her older, it breaks my fucking heart to bits.
Yeah.
Just and so yeah, that's this like forced into the situation, and then there's all this expectation, and then the disposability, which kills me, which it absolutely makes me feel so hopeless. How quickly, because again, it's not all these accounts, and a lot of people in the West, a lot of people who are very comfortable or whatever, not saying, oh, Montez did a problematic, but like, oh, he's a traitor. Oh, this is
Right.
horrible. This is the worst
Immediately
thing.
dismissing him. Right.
Fuck him. Yeah, I mean, canceling, but like in such an extreme situation of someone who's survived genocide.
Mm-hmm. It's the violent swing of the pendulum from extremely celebrated to disposed of,
Yeah.
right? Canceled is not even the word because there's such vitriol that comes with, or that from what I've seen has come with people's reaction to Mu'taz after he left. I think it's it was disturbing to see the, I don't know if this is the right word, the idolization
Mm,
of people like Mu'taz and Bisan
mm.
and others. And then seeing how little, how one mistake or one misstep or one disagreement can lead to immediate, like you said, immediate disposal. I think that's terrifying. But it was, for me, it was expected, seeing as how people, like I said, were idolizing him in the beginning.
Yeah.
That never comes with good, in my opinion.
It's it's like I've been thinking a lot about this with the extreme levels of dehumanization. Like it's the feeling of a natural response is to fetishize, is to glorify, to create a
Mm-hmm.
hero. You know, this person, like they say he's a devil, no, he's an angel. Because it's not as powerful to respond to that, like, no, he's a complex human who has a lot of flaws and is just
Right.
young and whatever. And yeah, I remember like the first few days after he was evacuated. Honestly, one of the comment that like killed me was like, إنه ماشي حاله بالخليج, you know?
Yeah.
إنه خلاص, we don't need to
Yeah.
listen to him because he's gone. And it's like, but I remember, actually, I remember there was one really interesting, and this sums up so much of this. There was a Sudanese woman who was in Sudan, whose family is displaced, who uncovered a video, or like had already known, but no one was talking about this, a video of Mu'taz making an anti-black joke. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found this really interesting because she posts this, she writes her things. It becomes the talk of the day for 2 days, and you get all sorts of
Yeah.
people jumping in on it. And like how I see this kind of resolved, but obviously the implications are far, far like wider, is that then Maltese kind of acknowledges and says like, oh, whatever. And she responds like, oh, thank you so much for responding and whatever. And there was a kind of
Mm-hmm.
actual accountability and actual discussion sort of. But outside of that, you had so many people jumping in. And one comment that from quite a big account, I think someone in the US, I think African American uh, activist, I don't know what, just a shit poster, wrote, oh, Montez and Bisan are anti-black. I can't wait to clock out. And it
Wow.
was like, first of all,
Yeah.
like how quickly he threw Bisan in there with nothing, with no evidence, with no nothing. And
Right.
also it just, but then also the contingency, the I can't wait to clock out. I don't know. And then I'll only
Yeah, it
fight.
goes back to that filling the quota and feel doing what you think you should be doing, not what you actually believe you should be doing. I'm supporting this cause because everybody else is, and it seems like this is supposed to be the thing that everybody's doing, that we should be doing, without any really true understanding of why you're doing it. it. To me, I think it's totally okay if you feel like this is none of my business. I don't know. I don't understand. I'm not getting involved. To me, that is much better than let me just act like I know what I'm doing. Let me just follow the crowd. And when the crowd gets tired, or when I find something that can absolve me from this responsibility, then I can, like they said, clock out. I saw that. I saw the discussion. I saw the funny thing about the discussion about Martez's video was Martez's video is very old. The discussion took place months after the video actually came out.
Yeah.
And when we first saw the video, we were all like, "Oh, why did you have to do that?" But again, Martez is an individual. People are going to say stupid things. They're going to do stupid things. People are products of their environment, their culture, their preconceived notions, whatever they've been fed, right? Whatever they've absorbed over their the years of their life, wherever they are. So unsurprising, but also okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But because of that, like you said, the hero status or the idolization of Mu'taz, I responded to the video, I quote tweeted it, and I wrote sigh. That's all I wrote. That's it. Way back then. And there were so many people responding to me sighing with, oh, you guys just want to be mad at something. Everything doesn't have to be about race. All I said was sigh. That's all I said. I wasn't particularly moved, and a lot of other Sudanese people were not particularly enraged by, not in the way, not in the like foaming at the mouth way that the discourse turned into all those months later. It's just, again, people are going to say stupid things, but once we pinpoint a person in the Western context, I mean, I think even in the Eastern one, even in our countries, you pinpoint a person that is saying the right things, or you perceive to be saying the right things. People are celebrating, you celebrate along with them, and then you wait for their downfall. And their downfall doesn't take nearly as much as their rise to fame, right? It takes a lot for a person to become idolized. It takes one thing for them to be destroyed.
Yeah. And that's the
And
disposability.
now and that's the disposability. And now that's why now there's a conversation of, let's not idolize people. Let's not expect too much from regular human beings, just the same way that people are discussing celebrities' involvement in these current issues.
Mm.
Why are we looking to them for a stance or a position?
Yeah.
They're just people, just like everybody. It's it's complicated, and again, it all detracts from, in my opinion, who we should be looking at. Martez is a person who saw a a need and filled it. He saw a need for coverage and he filled it. These activists, these online, whatever, these TikTokers, these social media personalities, if they talk about it, if they talk about it, they are people who saw a need for something to be covered and they did it. Why are we not having that same energy for the people who actually have the power to to change things? And the people who have the power to change things have fashioned this in the right way so that
Mm.
we are so busy fighting each other in the barrel, and they are, on the yacht, living it up, free from any sort of headache, while we all nip at each other and tear each other apart.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
So another thing is that for me, I see this, there's a concept of the proximity effect, that you can
Mm-hmm.
reach Mohtaz, but you can't
Right,
reach Mahmoud Abbas because he's not on Twitter. You know what I mean?
right.
But also, there's this conflation with social media influence with power. Like he has influence,
Yeah,
he has an audience, but he doesn't have power. He's a 24-year-old genocide. He could have just been killed very easily,
right.
but he has no political power. And you're right, those are the people we should be kind of really targeting. But how do we target? That's still like, and you know what I mean? Like, I think the really scary thing from Sudan, from Syria, from just our entire fucking region is that as uninspired, as mediocre, as just like ridiculous as they have the guns at the military,
Yeah,
the generals, the whoever. And it's just this very basic formula, you know? I mean, yeah, Hamid uses like ChatGPT to write his things. It doesn't matter, he makes shit up. Yeah.
right, right.
It's very difficult when thinking about, because again, like there's obviously the fear in any context of actually taking up weapons or whatever, that it becomes a,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I've dug myself into a thing here, but how to go beyond that is just, it's very difficult to imagine. And at the moment, I do see us as a region, but globally at like we're hitting a wall, going on in the streets, protesting, we get pushed back. Nothing's really changing, except the rich are getting insanely richer and
Right.
and the world's falling apart. So I want to slowly wrap up and I want to ask if you have any practices or anything that you do that you feel, I don't know, grounds you because like or because my problem these days, I know, big questions, but did I jump too quickly?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
I'm
But
I'm laughing because I don't have an answer. Go
oh,
ahead, sorry. Yeah. It's also one of those dreaded questions of like, what do you do to ground yourself?
yeah. How do
Don't
you
ask
keep
me
doing
that.
it? Where do you get the strength? I noticed
Right.
this was the question, like all the journalists that came out. all the doctors, all the whatever, whenever they'd get interviewed, especially by not just Western, just because there's also a different dichotomy between East and West, or like global South, global North. When it's people coming out of these situations of complete collapse, of genocide, there is the outside world. And like none of us really have an understanding of what it means. This is the reason that I do this podcast as well, because I think psychology as a field really is not prepared, is not equipped to understand an entire society collapse, to understand genocide,
Hmm.
Anyway, but yeah, so I've been doing things. I've been trying to be active. I've done this podcast. I go out and do my things, but I don't know. I, I'm constantly resisting despair,
Hmm.
and I know you are too. And I know you're a whole other person. And so it's not like, how do you do it? But it's like, you seem to be doing it a bit better. As in, you're on there every day, you're clocking in. Is it smokes and mirrors?
It is.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Um, I think this is gonna sound, it's not going to make sense, but doing this daily practice of gathering the news and, summarizing and making the videos, I think that's what grounds me. I'm saying it in a question form because I'm not sure. I have yet to find something outside of that that makes me feel grounded or gives me peace of mind or calms my anxiety, unfortunately. And that's not a healthy thing at all. But in the beginning, even during the revolution, I took on this responsibility as a way to process the events of the day and make myself feel like if I have understanding, if I know what's happening, I can stay calm versus not knowing what's happening or just seeing things fly in front of me, headlines fly in front of me, and not being able to absorb and process that information. Right now, I feel like a plastic bag floating in the wind. And the one thing that is keeping me attached, and only one thing I'm attached to, like stabilizing me, this this responsibility. I think the difference between what I was doing in 2019 and what I'm doing now is now I am completely distraught. And the one thing I have been, I mean, I'm clinging to these daily recaps and this news with everything I've got just to keep myself from spiraling. And for a lot of people, I asked this question the other day on Insta story. I was saying, I, I can't do anything else. I tried watching a show or trying to do something else. One of my previous activities before this war, just to feel some sense of normalcy, and I can't get out of my own head. And there's also this like very deep sense of guilt that why are you doing this leisurely activity when all of this is happening? What if while you're watching this show, some news drops on Twitter and you've missed it? Some like, earth shattering event happens and you've missed it. That's constantly in my mind. So I can't even distract myself for a second. And so I was asking people, well, what do you do? How do you cope? How do Sudanese people, especially Sudanese people abroad, how do you cope with the anxiety and the fear and the anger, right? And the disappointment that we feel that this is happening to us. And the bulk of the responses were, you need a break. You need to stop doing these recaps. You need to stop following the news. And in my mind, I was like, you're asking me to go insane. You're
Yeah.
effectively asking me. And it's not healthy, but it's the one coping mechanism I found, the one disturbing, ironic coping mechanism that I have. Uh, I've also tried or considered, falling back on the things that have brought me peace in the past, like writing, like podcasting, like getting those thoughts out. And proven, in theory, when I think about it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. But in practice, it's so difficult because saying the thing out loud or seeing it written in front of you is terrifying. And I think I'm scared of hearing myself, even though sometimes I do say it like in a video or whatever, but just having that permanence, saying the thing out loud and then hearing it back is so terrifying to me. I don't think I am ready to face the amount of despair that I truly feel. And if I write it down or I record it, I don't know what's going to happen to me mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
So that's, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm like blowing it out of proportion in my mind, but just the idea of it is scary.
So, I mean, that's actually one of the biggest things that we talked about, me and Lino, because during 2019, 2020, 2021, during all the horrible shit that was happening in Lebanon, the absurd shit, I told her that I felt like I had a
Mm-hmm.
similar task as her. And we were part of like a small kind of Twitter community of naming the thing. And I noticed that around 2021, we all just simultaneously gave up. I don't remember what it
Mm,
was. Each person had their thing, but things were getting too complex, changing every day, and getting too absurd slash miserable that it's like, what's the point of naming the thing? And also, I named the thing yesterday, but now it's completely different. And so,
yeah,
yeah, so I'm resonating with that pretty hard. And also, like, the thing that I've been using, the term is not spiraling, but like falling into a rut because
mm-hmm.
I've been using this analogy of a shark. Sharks need to keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is that kind of thing like you're describing. And I feel too that the moment I stop, I just like a rock, I just
Yeah,
fall right through. And it's really difficult to bring myself back up. But the really difficult thing is that there's not this normalcy around me for me to come back to. Everything's changed. And it has been really difficult. What do you do when
right,
normal has changed?
right.
But also the normal around me, to me, is abnormal. I can't accept this
Yeah,
society around me as the norm.
yeah. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier of the dissonance of like you're in your home going through all of this strife and seeing it and then going outside and the sun is shining and people are having picnics and whatever. Like how do you consolidate the two? It's tough.
It has been tough, but I appreciate you and love the work you do, and I hope you keep doing it. And I hope soon we'll be able to do work that's, I don't know, just satisfying our intellectual or
Yeah,
artistic urges of just. I do like that you do talk about. You did have a story very recently where you talk about a show.
yeah. I tried. I tried. It fell apart very quickly, but I tried. I hope so. And I thank you for inviting me on here because again, I think there's been such an isolation that I've been in since April of last year. And it's nice to talk to someone who gets it, right? But there's that isolation has made me is it makes you feel crazy. It makes you feel like, am I imagining this? Am I overreacting, or is this truly as devastating as it feels? And having a conversation like this really is comforting and vindicating in some way of like, okay, this is real. This is real, and the outside world is not going to gaslight me that it's not, and my feelings are valid,
Yeah,
and other people are also feeling this. And not to say that, not in the sense of like misery loves company, like other people are miserable too, but it just feels good to have that solidarity of like, I'm not just saying, oh, poor you. I actually truly genuinely understand what you're going through. So I thank you. And I thank you for all of the work that you do and all of the support and solidarity that you give Sudan and Sudanese causes. You're amazing.
thank you. Oh my God. Okay. I didn't see that coming. Yeah. So okay. Thank you so much for joining me. And yeah.
Thank you.